Are there any other supporting arguments for this? Or any other objections? Do you want to respond to any of that, or what kind of criticisms does this view have? Push me back a little bit. Yes.
Supporting, actually, one of the things that I love about the Christus Victor is how it focuses on Jesus's life. You know,
Yes.
Jesus.
Yes.
So many people have been unjustly crucified. None of them created a world-spanning religion. Really, in my mind, it's really Jesus's life and teachings that are exceptional, and a lot of them just kind of glance over that as like.
See, that is, I think, a huge point. I make that in the article with Schreiner. But in penal substitution, the life of Jesus is pretty inconsequential. Just like our life is inconsequential to this transaction in the courtroom. Well, Jesus' life is sort of just a incidental prelude. The main thing is that he died. He shed his blood. But what's the connection between that and everything else Jesus does? It's almost like if Jesus had gotten crucified when he was 2 years old, it'd have the same effect. You want a view that integrates everything here, and the Christus Victor, everything that Jesus does is in one way or another connected to manifesting the love of the Father over and against the darkness of the devil. And so I think it's the most common denominator to everything. Good point, real good point. Other pros or cons you see with the Christus Victor view? Okay.
This is kind of a con, is that sometimes I feel like it puts too much emphasis on the devil. Sometimes I feel like Christ's primary objective wasn't to push back Satan. He could have done that from a throne room in heaven, but it was to save us on the ground. And that, shall we say, the pushing back of the devil was a causality only because of his love for us.
How about love for us and for the whole creation?
Right.
Right, because that's what's... Yeah. Would there not be pushback on the part of God against evil, even if we weren't in the mix? Maybe it doesn't good just overcome evil because it's supposed to? Okay.
I mean, it's a pretty big hypothetical, but it's hard to say when it's not even pushed back now, when it's affecting the things he's loved entirely. So,
what if he is pushing back as hard as he can, given the constraints that are in place for this kind of world to be the kind of world it needed to be?
Would those constraints exist? A lot of those constraints might exist even if we did, so it's hard to say.
Yeah. Good, fair enough. Yes.
Yesterday, we were talking about Calvinism versus Arminianism and the fundamental difference in what does a beautiful God mean, or what both sides are saying this is what a beautiful God is, and I feel like this is the same thing between penal substitution and Christus Victor.
Let me tweet. Can you say that again?
The same question about what is a beautiful God comes up here between the two atonement theories, and this is for many Christians I know in American context. If rugged individualism and world policing and fighting for justice literally with violence, if that isn't what God's about, then God isn't beautiful to a lot of American evangelicals.
Yeah, right.
So I feel like here we're really talking about what is the definition of a beautiful God.
Mm-hmm. Well, it certainly affects that. And what I like about this is that so God defeats evil by pouring himself out, by self-sacrificial love. A good analogy of kind of what's going on here, according to Christus Victor view, is that so God wants his bride. Okay, he wants Christ to have his bride. He wants to invite others in on the triune dance, all that. But the bride went and got herself kidnapped by this lunatic, crazy guy who's going to torture her to death. And so Jesus has to go rescue his bride, his would-be bride, because he's in passionate love with his bride, and he ends up giving his life for her sake. And that's the thing here, is that no one's here denying substitutionary atonement. It's penal substitution that is the problem. Jesus does. It's the difference between, the judge killing me instead of killing you because of some weird judicial rule. It's between that on the one hand, that's penal substitution, and between me jumping in front of a bus to push you out of the way. I died as a substitute, but not by placating someone's wrath. I just did it out of self-sacrificial love. So yeah, I think it's.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry, one additional thought. What you
Don't
said.
ever apologize.
Okay,
I like
thank
discussion.
You've said this a number of times, and it really helps me. Is either God is love or God is love, but also justice. Is that but? If you need that but, you can't go the Christus Victus route, because if justice isn't a subordinate aspect of God to God being love, if you have to have that. And really, I think when people say the but, God is love but justice, they're actually putting justice above love.
Right.
Well,
And
defining
something-
justice in a different way too.
What was that?
That it's penal justice instead of restorative justice.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, so God is love, but he's also get even. Which is to say, God is love, but not in a 1 Corinthians 13 kind of way. That love keeps no record of wrongs and all of that.
Spare the rod.
Right. But you're right, and it's even the punishment there is seen in judicial terms. It's imposed. Yes?
Could you speak on how this relates to creation and also maybe the retroactive act of it, like how it may encompass the past as well as the future?
Say more about what you're asking.
So, when Jesus died, the way I look at it is it retroactively covers like the past and pushes back evil in the past as well, in some sense.
I don't know how you can push back anything in the past.
So,
The past is past.
yeah. I'll have to think about that and explain it better. But could you maybe speak to the creation aspect of it as well?
Okay, so in my view, the whole world has been, there's an angelic fall long before there's a human fall. And the powers were given authority over aspects of creation, just like we're given authority over aspects of creation. And what happens to the creation, this little segment of creation that we're on, will depend on the fate of human beings. And that's the theme you find throughout the Bible. As people go, so the land goes. So also, as the powers go, so the creation goes. And so there's been a rebellion, and they're now using some of the power that they had over aspects of creation at cross purposes with God, so that nature's corrupted. And and I come to that conclusion because throughout the New Testament, they are diagnosing diseases and infirmities and deformities as being things that are of the devil. But those things are totally predictable given the laws of physics that are in operation now. And Hebrews, we saw it earlier, Hebrews says that Jesus came to destroy the one who has the power of death. That is the devil. But death is simply a natural result of the laws of physics as they're operating now. So if infirmities and diseases and sicknesses and death, if all of that is a result of demonic interference, and yet it's also just the laws of nature operating the way that they do in this world, it leads me to think that the laws of nature as they're operating right now in this world are not the laws that God originally had. They're corruption of those. And you can still see the glory of God in creation, but you can also see a whole lot of demonic stuff. I take that paradigm now and look at evolution, I see evolution as this sort of shimmying process of God creating and Satan discreating, but then God bringing good out of evil, and he shimmies his way up to human beings. So when Jesus defeats the powers, that then is going to begin to restore creation. And I hope that answers your question. Yes?
I want to take a stab at JDW's question.
Not literally though, huh?
No.
No, I'm stabbing here.
If you read Acts 4:12 completely literally, salvation is found in no one else but Jesus, then, and I think some people do take that literally, then it has to be retroactive. It has to affect people in the past, otherwise everyone would be condemned pre-Jesus. Is that a fair assessment?
Not only that, but also considering the creation, maybe didn't have any effect on the creation in the past. I don't know, but yes, to some extent. That.
Yeah. Okay. So, it's usually taken by inclusivists to mean that the umbrella of Jesus' work covers more than realize it. So that work saves them, even if they don't know that. And you can take that not just for the old people of the Old Testament, but also throughout the world. That is. And so, yeah, in that sense, I could say, yeah, that is, it delivers them. But on the other hand, do you need to say that? Is it the work that includes these people, or is it just the fact that God is the kind of God that God is, and that's why he did this work? In other words, I think God's always been consistent with who he is revealed to be in Christ, and that's not a God who sends people to hell on a technicality or anything like that. And he just shows us how he's always been on the cross. But I don't know if the cross now allows him to love and forgive the folks in the Old Testament. That usually is done out of a penal substitution perspective. That he needed to die, and so then you have this retroactive in time kind of thing. With the Christus Victor view, I don't think you need to do the stress is on the character of God, not on the cross as a means that allows God to. In fact, the cross. See, in the penal substitution view, the cross is what allows God to love sinners. But in the Christus Victor view, God doesn't need anything to allow him to do that. It's just God's by nature. And so there's no mechanism that's required there.
So in a sense, like penal justification requires retroactivity, but the Christus Victor negates the need for it at all.
Yeah, I don't think, it's certainly a tremendous advantage. I'm so glad I live post-Christ rather than pre-Christ. But I don't think that it's now harder or easier to get to heaven because of it. I think God's always been the same.
So if the cross was in his way delivering people from Satan, people were also maybe captured by Satan in the past. Does the cross somehow deliver them from Satan in the past?
No, they're gone now. There's no, like the past is, the past by definition is unchangeable. I think that's the difference between the past and the future. The future is open, the past is settled. So you can't change that. But I think all of humanity has been captured ever since the fall. We've been in bondage. And that's how the New Testament depicts us as being strongly in bondage, dead in sin, to the principalities, powers, and that's why we need to get set free. Here's one pushback on it. Christus Victor has never been good at answering this. And maybe it's because there is no better answer than what I've given, but it's how does the cross defeat the powers? How does that work? And what are the mechanics at work here? And the thing is that this is what did the Christus Victor view in. Because as people tried to come up with reasons for that, they looked silly. And so they would come up with, the fishhook theory, where Jesus was sort of like the bait, and Satan then swallowed the bait, but God knew all along that Jesus was going to blow up 3 days later and blow up that fish and whatever. Or they had a ransom theory where we were held kidnapped, but Jesus was kind of the ransom payoff. So God, said, okay, take my son instead, give me those people back. But then it was God knew all along that Satan could never hang on to Jesus, so it backfired on Satan. And so they have the ransom theory and the fishhook theory and several others like that. And those they sounded implausible. Like God's involved in deception, or does God have to pay off a debt? Is Satan that much? This seems like Satan's as powerful as God. And so those stories just didn't hold, and that's why Anselm, when he came along with a much more sophisticated way of thinking about it, based on feudal society, that the feudal lords must be satisfied. Well, that just captured the popular imagination, and that's how Christus Victor lost it. I'm not sure you can do anything more than to say this. It's like, I don't know the mechanics of when I turn on that light. I know I can describe to you what they are. I can't say that anyone really understands it, but light just does repel darkness. That's what it means. That's what it is to be light. Turn on the light, and it pushes back the darkness. Darkness is an absence of light. And so light being what it is and darkness being what it is, light is always going to push out darkness. What if love just does defeat evil? And so the greatest act of love defeats the ultimate source of evil. It just is that. That's why I refer to it as an atomic bomb, an explosion. It's just this demonstration of love breaks the chains. Love breaks chains. Love sets people free. Love opens eyes, opens hearts. It transforms people. And that is the greatest act of love that could ever be. And so that's how. Maybe that's all the farther you can go. Yes.
So I like that. Harkening back a little bit to like the C.S. Lewis Narnia thing, where this sacrificial love has some mystical power to create the stone.
Deep, deep magic.
But also, if that's true, and I think it is, we're getting into kind of the mystical, and we can't. This is speculative, but that's what theology is about. Does that still apply then to us as Christ's body, offering acts of love in a war zone of a world? Do we, as we, individually or especially corporately, are sacrificially loving? Is that in some way, I mean, he defeated there was a defeat that
Sure,
he
sure.
done, but then there's the D-Day, VE Day. And
Right.
So, do you have
Absolutely.
any thoughts about the mystical body of Christ, sort of?
Well, you could probably you ran our whole refuge ministry for so long. You could probably give more examples of it than I can. I mean, it's how love heals people, love restores people. It's the love can heal enemies, turn them into friends.
Logical level. I'm talking also on this spiritual warfare, supernatural level, which of course we can only speculate. But I really believe that that's true.
No, I totally do, and that's why. So when Paul says that our struggle is never against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers and dominions and authorities, he's laying out the options there. That you either are going to be fighting the powers by how you love others and refuse to make them an enemy, or you're being played by the powers by thinking that the other person is your enemy when in fact you're being
Played by the enemy.
One example is, I mean, you made reference to this earlier about how in the civil rights movement, for example, when Martin Luther King and his followers were at the Selma March, for example, and then they're being fire hosed and bitten by dogs, etc., and that's on national news, and there's something that awakens the conscience of people that they feel that it changes them, kind of, it humanizes the,
Sure.
and it sort of reveals the sinfulness of segregation and all that. I can explain some of that on this purely psychological level, but what if there is a spiritual warfare thing as well? Like the
I agree.
darkness that blinds people's minds as racists or as bigots or as angry, violent people. An act of sacrificial love somehow helps unveil their minds to what's true.
Absolutely, yeah.
I mean, we hear stories of this a lot. We just went to see Brian Stevenson, the Brian Stevenson thing, and in his book, he tells the story of this prison guard who had all the Confederate flag stuff, and as racist as you could look on his pickup truck outside in the parking lot, and he's the guard that Stevenson has to get to see his client in the prison. And this guy is making him do a strip search and doing everything he can do to demean Brian Stevenson. And then this Brian Stevenson is defending this guy in court who was a foster kid who had been terribly, his horrible abuse story of foster care, etc., was just terrible. Well, this guard was there, this particular guard who was racist and was mistreating Stevenson, was sitting in the courtroom when Stevenson was defending this guy and unpacking his story. Here's a black guy defending a white prisoner and having compassion on this guy's story as a foster kid. And then the next time Stevenson went to the prison to visit this client, this guard, he's expecting the guard to demean him and mistreat him and do a strip search and all this, and the guy says, sir, Mr. Stevenson, sir, and can I do this? And no, you don't have to do that, sir. And then finally, Stevenson is saying, why are you treating me so different? What's going on here? It's really good. It's a 180-degree turn from an absolute racist who was mistreating and demeaning this guy to being very respectful and humble. And he goes up to Stevenson, he whispers in his ear, he said, you know what? I was raised, I didn't think anybody had it worse than I did in foster care. And I saw you defending, and I heard his story, and he had it way worse than I did. And your ministry to this guy was, it changed my heart, right? So it's like there's something there that the cloud lifted.
Absolutely.
The cloud lifted. I think it's more than just the psychological.
No, I agree. I think
There's
that's
something powerful, and then now that makes me excited about greater works.
You're doing cosmic warfare when that is Ephesians 6:12, and that's I think that's what eventually saves the world. I right now witnessing this with a family member where there's a lady who's just selflessly loving on my daughter, who's very damaged, and that love just introduces hope. It opens up doors, possibilities. A person's stuck. And see, it's like the Manichaeans were, even C.S. Lewis said, that was a right manly religion. It was very close to the truth. Manichaeanism, I think, is. It's just that they thought it was an eternal thing when in fact it's a temporal thing. But there are forces out there that are pulling us constantly towards self-centeredness, isolation. You know, me, I get it my way, don't put up any, and it's like in a black hole, it gets smaller and smaller, but God's out there pulling people in this other direction, to expand, to open up, other-oriented. Look at the beauty, there's a more beautiful way of living, and the freedom, and so there's that polarity, but it's the acts of love that I think just, it can be contagious, just like evil can be contagious too. But I think that's what brings the healing. Young man in the back.
So let me get this straight. So the first 1,000 years of Christian history, the Christus Victor view dominates. Unquestioned. But apparently that entire time, all the Christus Victor view people realized there is a fundamental question that begs an answer, namely, what is the mechanism that makes sense of this? Because every theory is supposed to make sense of something. And so they start offering mechanistic examples. Ransom theory, bush hook, there's the mousetrap theory, like all these different, maybe this, maybe this. Finally gets to the Middle Ages, and you're saying, Anselm goes, those answers are silly, and because you don't even have a real answer, here's a better way to think of it, satisfaction theory, which Calvin and Luther blow up into the penal substitution theory, which is now the dominant view in evangelical thinking. And I sense you're attempting part of a rehabilitation project on Christus Victor for today. You wanted to be more plausible than the penal substitution.
Sure.
And so, when it comes back to the fundamental problem of the Christus Victor theory, which is the mechanism question, your answer is, play the mystery card.
Oh, it may be, but is that the same as saying that you've hit a fundamental, like at what point, okay, so it's like in quantum physics, they discover that there's this indeterminacy, that you can't meticulously predict how or where a particle will show up when you measure it. You can give a probability, a bell curve probability wave function, but you can't specify with any further detail. And or you could say you could measure the velocity of the particle, but you can't locate it, or you can locate it, but you can't measure the velocity because of Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. Now, if you ask, why is that the case? So you have two schools. The Copenhagen school said, Einstein wanted to know, why is that the case? And assuming that there must be a further explanation, because he thinks that everything is meticulously determined, so you can't have any indeterminacy. So if all we have is indeterminacy, there must be a more fundamental why. Whereas the Copenhagen school said, no, this is just the way reality is. And it's no more arbitrary to think that reality includes spontaneity than it is to think that reality excludes spontaneity. But, so what I'm saying is, or you can ask the question, what is energy? We know that we can say how everything that exists, how it's a manifestation of energy, and you can break it down to its smallest units of energy, which are quantum particles, but we don't know what energy is. It's just, ultimately, it's what it goes beep, beep, beep on our little machines when we set them up right. You know, you can't see quantum particles, but, so is that, in saying light just does overcome darkness, what if that's the most fundamental thing that we can say? There's no more how to it.
What's the cert?
The what? Yeah, at some point you have to hit absurd.
Okay.
You just don't want the absurd to be absurd.
Okay. So, what if someone says back to you?
What if?
What if someone
What
used your analogy?
You want a piece of me? You want a
What if
piece of
someone
this?
used your analogy of, it's just absurd, for the question, why do people get sick? And this, let's say they're asking this in the 1700s. And they go, it's just absurd. It's just one of those things. And no one ever bothers to actually develop a microscope that finds germs, or we have germ theory now about, there is a mechanism by which we get sick. So one must be careful when one applies the quantum analogy, it's just absurd argument, because that could be playing a convenient mystery card as opposed to pressing through to more data.
Yeah, I'm open to, if there are if there's more to be said about that, I would like to know it, because I have been unsatisfied with that all my life. I just can't think of any other sort of explanation. I think the cross just does it.
Does the covenant thing come into play here?
Oh, okay. Oh, you want to go there? So here, I want to invite you. Just hang on a second. I invite you in on a discussion that we've had ongoing for like 15 years, and
We can't write our atonement book yet.
yeah, it's kind of in the way. Well, there's other things too, but openness. So here's the thing. Why did Jesus have to die? We both agree that the covenant breaking leads to death. You're rejecting the God of life, it leads to death. Paul would agree with the penal substitution to this degree, that sin has got to be punished, or the death consequences have to be experienced. Okay, why don't you come up here and explain your view? Because I seem to never get it right.
Why you put me in the penal camp? It's like, wait a minute.
Well, I said in that one respect.
No, well, look, in this one respect, you agree with the penal substitution. God exists. Do you agree? You agree God exists?
Yeah.
Penal substitution, dude. It's like, come on.
Does someone have to experience the death consequences of sin?
Does someone have to...
Just
A
one
moment
sin.
ago you said, I'm not saying no substitution, I'm saying no penal substitution.
Right.
Okay, so you and I actually joined together on substitution. If you want to say something about my view as substitutionary, fine. Don't say penal, because penal demands this idea of an appeasement.
I was just referring to the fact that the thing I think is distinctive about your view is that the death consequences have got to be experienced. God can't just let that go.
Yeah, but that's not about his appeasement.
Okay, but you do agree that God can't just let that go.
Well,
I'm just trying to get.
In the same sense that God can't make a married bachelor,
Okay,
I
yeah.
don't think. Yeah, then I don't think he can make death consequences not exist when in fact covenants have been broken that are death consequences. To me, that's a logical cert.
Okay, so here's the difference. So there is the consequences have got to be experienced by either us or by Jesus. Whereas I think the death consequences are the result of being in bondage to Satan. Satan is when it comes to kill, steal, and destroy, and so there is no other cert there. Yes, we have to be freed from that, but I don't think that the death our difference I think is this, that you hold that one sin deserves death, or is death, whereas I think God can forgive that.
I think you can forgive it.
Then,
I don't think it's not.
but someone's got to
It's
fight
like,
for it.
is one bullet to the brain death, or do you need 10 bullets? I think one bullet does is about much more than
Okay.
10 bullets.
So, and then someone's got to die.
If you shoot yourself in the head, you're going to die. That's what death is. Yeah.
Right. So then the only reason that all of us didn't die instantly is because
Mercy.
mercy. Okay.
I totally believe that.
But then Jesus has to die because someone has to die.
I go back to an absorption model. I like what you said. I think Jesus absorbs, as an analogy. So it's not about appeasement. It's not about mathematical legislation. Well, if he's got us, it's the nature of the case that covenant breaking
Mystery card?
gives the no. Well, yeah. So that's the truth. We both do play the mystery card. I think I get one step farther down the road,
Oh.
right? And if job security for you and I depends on going down the road,
That's
this is
very
an
persuasive
advantage to me. No, so here's parts of the reasons why, even if I'm wrong, I still can't be satisfied with where you stop. Because I do think the New Testament gives us some data that there is a mechanism, and it points us in some directions of what it must be. And I find this, for example, in a verse you really love, Colossians 2, 13 to 15. I think Paul's giving us some mechanistic reasoning to why the principalities and powers that Jesus must defeat have us. And this is what I've never gotten from just your sheer Christus Victor view. Just because I sin, how does that put me under the bondage of this angelic creature who sinned? So much so that God has to defeat him in order to save me, when God's far more omnipotently powerful. God's level of omnipotence above Satan's power is so far that it makes me and Satan look almost par compared to his. But he still has to deal with this creature and his realm in order to set me free. You've never given me a mechanistic answer for that reason. That's just like, well, that's just the way it is. He's got to like get rid of him. People, why? What's the connection between my sin and Satan's sin putting me under Satan's kingdom? Where'd that kingdom, what's that even a kingdom of what?
Kingdom of sin, kingdom of darkness. Kingdom.
How's it a kingdom?
I'd say, even if I couldn't explain that, that I think is a fact. I can.
Absurd?
Well, I don't. It's a revealed fact that salvation is being transported from the kingdom of darkness into the kingdom of light. That there is this whoever sins is a slave to sin. Okay, so take it up with Jesus.
Slave to sin, not a slave to Satan.
But if you're slave to Satan or to sin, you'd be a slave to Satan. He's the principality power over the whole thing.
Says who?
The Bible. Don't you read the Bible?
What's the mechanism?
The Bible.
No.
So, but excuse me, it's like saying, why would God have to deal with a parent to rescue this children, or deal with a kidnapper to rescue this person? It's a kidnapping of sorts, where we've been taken hostage.
Except that's an analogy.
Well, what if it's, but it refers to an analogy. I mean, it refers to a reality. And since we are taken captive, we're
In a sense. And in some sense, we're not. In some sense, here I am, and wherever Satan is, it's not here. He's a finite creature somewhere.
So this is the disagreement. So I think that when Satan does double duty, we can explain why
Yeah.
it doesn't necessarily. Whereas you think that there's something intrinsic to covenant. That,
Because I go back to love.
right.
So for me, covenant's just a way of trying to understand the mechanics of love.
Mhm.
And so if love is always relational, and if all sin is the breaking of love, breaking of bonds of love, which I think it is, and covenant just helps give language to that. So really it's a love-based message, not a covenant thing. Covenant's just a way of thinking about it. Then to break relationship is to die. That's just what death is. And once you're dead, you're dead. And so Jesus' repair of that, the radical love of God that comes in and repairs that, absorbs all of my choices to break covenant with God, others, self, and creation, all of which is mass suicide for myself. And he absorbs that into this moment. That's how I can make sense of what Paul said when he says, in defeating the powers, how he did that, and the mechanism behind it involved taking my sin and nailing it to the cross. There was a dimension of the substitutionary nature of Christ that he had to do something for me, not because I'm in bondage to something, because I did something to break relationship and kill that relationship. And now, by setting me free from what I did to break relationship with God, that has a repercussion on my bondage to Satan. It's not just Satan's the problem, I'm the problem. My propensity to break relationship with God, other, self, and creation is the problem.
Then why then does Paul say that all that was written against you was nailed to the cross, and doing that, God thereby disarmed the principalities and powers and made an open mockery of them? It was an act of warfare.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But that was the mechanism by which it wasn't just that Satan was big and strong and had me. The only reason Satan had me is because he had something on me, legal, if you want to put it that way.
Sure.
And what the legal thing was is, I had broken covenant. And that isn't about Satan, that's about me and God, the God of love who is covenant love. I had disconnected from him. And that disconnection is what gave Satan the power over.
Okay, what if, honestly I believe this, but I'm inclined to, that and I don't know quite where this is going, so I'm feeling like I'm going to take a step here.
We're theologians in the moment.
I know we are,
All
but
right.
I may be stepping over edge here. I almost want to say,
This is how
turn
it
off
goes
the
into
camera.
heresy.
Okay, look at, what if, okay, so the way I have thought about this,
Could make money on it.
because, okay, look at, so when Jesus dies on the cross, one died for all, therefore all have died, Paul says in Corinthians 5:14,
Yep.
and that God was in Christ reconciled the world to himself. He's not holding anyone's sin against him.
Yes.
Is that right? And this is the good news that we're supposed to be proclaiming. So he's not holding anyone's sin against him. And so, what if all along that all things are written against us, that whole accounting, he's the accuser of the brethren, every wrong thing you've ever done, every bad thought what if that was nailed to the cross when Jesus dies, because God is here revealing that God is completely this self-sacrificial love that's revealed in Christ, and that it was always the accuser who was keeping track of all the record. That was also the accusers doing it, and God is here revealing, not that I'm going to, that's never been his gig. He's never been like, oh, you sinned, I'm going to hold that against you. Someone's got to pay for that. That's all part of the devil's. The way I put it is that when God pays off our debt, he doesn't just pay like, you owe $100, so he gives $100. He blows up the whole economy so that it doesn't have any meaning any longer. Accusation has no meaning. The judgment has no meaning. And so that cross is part of the revelation of God. That's always been the enemy's gig. And he's here now doing away with that, because he's doing away with lies and doing away with the false conceptions of God. And God's always been, but what if God's never been holding our sin against us? That was always, he hates the sin because it destroys us, but love keeps no record, no account. 1 Corinthians 13.
But if sin is a relational category, not a legalistic category, then to say that God hates sin is to say that God hates the brokenness of the separated love relationship, and that is ontologically real. You can't just go,
right,
I don't hold it against you.
No, sure. But what I'm saying is that, but if God, there's no sense of, love keeps no record of wrong. Okay, there is this. It's between us. God's only concern is to reconcile this.
Yes.
But he's not, it doesn't bother him that he's had to do this 5 times or 20 times.
Absolutely.
There's no record of wrong.
Absolutely. Okay, I can go that far.
So he wants to repair
There's no
it.
record of particular wrongs, but is there a record or a fact that God recognizes that you did choose to leave?
Mm-hmm.
And that is the state I find you in. And I can't pretend we're reconciled when we're not.
Right, so what's necessary for you to come back? Is it necessary that someone experiences the consequences of what you did for you to come back? What if God can just forgive and welcome you back? Why can't God just do that? Yes. And then you.
I immediately jumped to the accuser thing myself in this debate. If Jesus reveals the fact that God is love and forgiveness is love and mercy and grace is love, so that has always existed eternally as who God is, then my question from there is, well, what about the natural consequences? Like, to what degree, and if I hurt you, it's fine for God to say, okay, I forgive you, I give you mercy, I give you grace, but what about the victim? What about, I've hurt you, how is that reconciled? Not in a debt sense, but not in a, I'm holding it against you, but hey, there's been hurt, how do we make you whole? I mean,
Right,
forgiving me or showing me mercy and grace doesn't make you whole, but God's not holding that against me. I'm forgiven, but he's still got to make you whole because I hurt you. So then I think about Satan. Satan's the accuser. He's holding the account. He's like, well, no, Clifton, you did this crime. You hurt Greg. But then I think, okay, well, there's got to be some kind of natural consequences and some kind of way to make victims whole. But then I also think about the beachhead idea of the creation of humans in Imago Dei to begin with. And I think about, okay, that's what the cross is. It is an inauguration of a kingdom that subverts the fallen creation, which is under the dominion of the archon powers and principalities. So I'm kind of in the middle, but I'm leaning towards Greg.
Wise. How do you vote?
Well, I'll start with that, and then I'll move on to what my question was before. Because, like, so on one hand, I do see what you're saying, Paul, with like the whole covenant and you being out of position to me. But it also sounds like that actually also sounds like kind of what Greg's saying, to this place of like, oh, God's holding this account against you, and it's like, if God's willing to take you back at any time, is he actually holding an account against you, or is this part of like going back all the way back through Carmen, through history of like us holding ourselves an account to how we've wronged God, and that being used as an excuse not to come back to God? And the reality of the question of like, essentially we continue to create like a divide between us and God, when in reality, he really just wants us to come back, and all the other fixtures are the accuser, right? And then by extension of that, like us being reprieved from sin isn't to like restore a theoretical covenant, as much as it is to remove you from the painful consequences that he doesn't want from you because he loves you. So that's, I don't know, that's just where my brain went with that. But my question about the Christus Victor model is, like for instance, Greg, you initially started with this, like the cross was like this like nuclear bomb, and I just, I've always had trouble with that with Christus Victor, because I just don't understand why it's necessary. Like you were talking about, it doesn't make sense. One of the reasons that Christus Victor fell out is that nobody can explain the mechanic for this nuclear bomb that like wipes out evil. And I don't even understand why that's necessary. Like when I look at Jesus's life, and it's like, we see him cast out demons. We see him sow seeds on every type of soil. We see him build disciples, which is the construction of a kingdom. We see him give the greatest act of sacrifice in like perhaps human history, right? And we see all these great things that he does. Where is the necessity for a nuclear bomb? It seems like sometimes like we try to put everything on the final grand battle, and then we ignore the 4 years of war that led up to that moment. That is largely the pushing force of the explosion that we.
Well, see, that's why I am emphatic in Cross Vision and Christus Warrior God, and today I've tried to be, where that you can't separate the cross from what preceded it. The cross is the through line that weaves it all together. So whenever I refer to the cross, I am thinking of Jesus' cross-centered life, death, and resurrection. And that whole thing is, and the bomb isn't a good analogy because it's not violent, but I don't know what else to call it. But that it's an explosion of pure, unprecedented love.
Right. So like, and in the same way that maybe one of the reasons we have trouble understanding it is our values throughout all human history is power over, right? Like every time I hear a mechanic explanation for like spiritual progression, it's really a way of saying like a way that God used power over on Satan. And that maybe one of the reasons it's hard to understand is that by appealing to people to do good things like sacrificing on a cross, it was a power under gesture on susceptible people who were open to such a thing. And in the same way that like it doesn't make sense to people before Martin Luther King that dying on the street protesting nonviolently would ever complete change in a power over United States government. It just doesn't sound logical. That really the issue is we're trying to adapt a power over mechanic in some way in relation to God and Satan, when in reality God is doing what he's always done, is operating in a power under mechanic, and we're trying to, shall we say, muddy the waters with the values that we have.
That's a really good question. I've wondered about that. Do we, even as Anabaptists who love Christus Victor, do we just relocate the violence from the physical realm to the spiritual realm?
Is it still redemptive violence?
Exactly.
Right.
That's a really good point. And I think we have to think about that more deeply.
Yeah.
Really, can I just say something?
Something.
I'm probably oversimplifying it, but you know, I always like to go to things I can see in my head. So like the prodigal son story, to me, helps me understand a lot because it's covenantal and relational. It captures the fallenness and the breaking of the relationship. It captures the consequences on both sides of the relationship. So if you're talking death consequences, there was a death of their relationship. You know, the father and the son were at home together. The son leaves, and both of them are experiencing the death, right? The son's experiencing, you know, all that suffering and, you know, eating with the pigs and actual literal hunger, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The father's suffering the loss of his son from home, the worry about his son. So both of them are experiencing a death. The son has to come back, right? So he has to make the choice to come back. But he's got that, you know, legalistic paradigm, and he's got the accuser in his mind. Well, Dad's going to be mad, and I'm going to have to appease him.
Yeah,
but he's got it completely wrong. He's got it completely wrong, right?
Right.
So all that really mattered was the father wanted the son back, and forgiveness was never a question. He forgave the son. That was just its nature, right? What needed to happen was the son needed to return. He didn't need to give the speech. He just needed to return. But they both suffered consequences, didn't they? And there was something that came back to life. And so to me, in terms of atonement, and I think there's so many beautiful things. The son was in a bondage of sorts. He was in a darkness of sorts. They both, it cost them both something. But it wasn't penal, it wasn't punitive, it wasn't retributive, it wasn't any of that kind of thing. The Father was willing to absorb, which I love that language, the Father absorbed the pain and the loss and the humiliation and all that. So I don't know, I just find that story
Yeah.
helps me think about covenant, it helps me think
Okay,
about
and so what if, like, what if the son was not only just in bondage to his own stuff, but actually got kidnapped, all right, and was, or under delusion. Some sinister person got them, hypnotized them to think his father is evil and petty and whatever, okay, and he's just, okay, so then the father then, and here, you have to just, I'm not supporting modalism here, but the father then goes and sacrifices his life to get his son free, so that now they can be, restored. That is very much like, so the sacrifice was necessary to free the son, but there's no element in that thing where, like, I'm paying for the consequences of what you did, or he was already paying for the consequences of what he did. So then, do you need to have Christ paying for everyone's consequence? Could that be double jeopardy?
I wouldn't use payment like.
I wouldn't either.
Absorb.
Absorption thing. But can I ask this question too, because it was in my head before, when you're talking about the first 1,000 years, Christus Victor, etc. Wasn't it Irenaeus who had the recapitulation view?
Yeah.
Christus Victor was closely related to that. And wasn't that about, Christ becoming the head of the race again?
Yeah.
So Adam was the head of the race. He forfeited that and lost that. Satan now rightfully is the ruler over earth. Christ recapitulates, becomes the human head of the race again through his obedience, etc. Philippians 2 seems to be telling that story of this obedience unto death results in the highly exalted above all names and everything again. So to me, I'm not saying we'll ever be able to understand the total mechanics of it all.
Sure.
But I think Irenaeus was onto something in that recapitulation thing, and that's been lost.
Absolutely.
Even in the retelling of Christus Victor in military terms, purely like just defeating, because, well, I think Irenaeus was onto something there. Something was happening that allowed Christ as fully human. Yet that also answers the question, well, why did he have to be human?
Yes.
Right? Couldn't Jesus just have, like you said, I'm from the throne in heaven, why did he have to come to earth? He could have just somehow done something. No, I think there was a lot of reasons why he had to fully be human in order for this recapitulation, for a human now to be the rightful king of earth. He just happens to be the God-man. But how do you guys see that recapitulation?
He held that Christ lived into old age. Yeah, because he had to recapitulate every age of humanity. And he, that which Christ did not assume, he did not redeem. So he had to assume every age of. It's not one of his stronger arguments, but it's just one of those weird things. Like, it's really like, what?
I didn't think he was on earth doing that, did he?
As I read him, I thought he was. That he post-resurrection continued to live to absorb. He quotes one other, not John the Elder, but one other elder to that effect. So, anyways, it's a weird thing.